So this happened about 3 years ago, and I still smile about it when I'm having a bad day. Buckle up because this is a long one and the payoff is great. A little background. I worked at this mid-sized logistics company. I'm going to call it Shipco because I still have friends there and I don't want to get anyone in trouble. I was a senior coordinator in the warehouse operations department, which is a fancy way of saying I was the guy who made sure trucks got loaded correctly and shipments went out on time. I'd been there 6 years. I was good at my job, like really good. I had the fastest error-free shipping record in the entire regional division, and I'd been promoted twice. Enter the villain of our story. We'll call him Brad. Brad got hired as our new operations manager after our old boss, who was a legend named Linda, retired to go raise alpacas in Oregon. Genuinely. Linda's out there living her best life with alpacas while I'm about to tell you about the human equivalent of stepping on a Lego. Brad was 31. Brad had an MBA. Brad had never actually worked in a warehouse. Brad's previous job was consulting, which, as far as I could tell, meant he charged companies $400 an hour to tell them things their employees had been saying for free for years. Brad's first week, he gathered the entire team together and gave this whole speech about how we were operating on outdated intuition and needed to embrace data-driven protocols. He then handed every single one of us a 30-page binder titled Shipco Operational Excellence Framework. This binder was insane. It laid out in obsessive detail every single step of every single process. How to scan a package, how long to spend scanning a package, which hand to use, mandatory checklists for checklists, and here's the kicker. It made every single one of these steps mandatory, not suggested. Mandatory. Now, anyone who's worked in logistics knows that rule books like this are written by people who have never loaded a truck. You can't follow every rule to the letter because half of them contradict each other, and the other half would triple the time it takes to do anything. The whole industry runs on experienced people using judgment to cut corners that don't matter so they can focus on the corners that do matter. I tried to explain this to Brad politely, professionally. I said, Brad, look, some of these protocols are going to slow us down by like 40%. Can we talk about which ones are actually critical? Brad looked at me like I had just suggested we set the warehouse on fire. He said, and I quote, "The rule book exists for a reason. If you have a problem following it, maybe this isn't the right role for you." Red flag number 1. For about 2 months, I tried to make it work. I bent the rules where I had to, used my judgment, kept shipments going out on time. My numbers stayed good. Everyone else's numbers started dropping because they were actually trying to follow the binder, but Brad didn't care about numbers yet. He cared about compliance. Then came the incident. One Tuesday, we had a massive shipment going out to our biggest client. 200 pallets had to be on a truck by 4 p.m. or we'd breach the contract. Around 2 p.m., I noticed the paperwork for one pallet had the wrong product code. Clerical error happens all the time. The correct product was on the pallet. The code was just wrong on the sheet. A 5-second fix. I crossed it out, wrote the correct code, initialed it, and kept moving. Shipment went out at 3:47 p.m. Client was happy. Everyone was happy. Except Brad. Brad called me into his office Wednesday morning. He had printouts. He had highlighted sections of the binder. He informed me that, according to Section 14, subsection C, paragraph 7, any correction to shipping paperwork required a formal documentation amendment request to be filed, reviewed, and approved by a supervisor before the correction could be made. I pointed out that filing that form would have taken at least 2 hours, and we would have missed the shipping window, lost the client, and cost the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. Brad said, and I want you to really savor this sentence, "That's not your call to make." Your job is to follow the rule book to the letter every time. No exceptions. Am I clear? I paused. I looked at him. I looked at the binder. I looked back at him. I said, "Crystal clear, Brad." And I meant it. I went back to my desk. I opened that binder and I read it cover to cover. Over the next 3 days, on my own time, I studied it like it was the Bible and I was about to be tested by God Himself. I highlighted, I tabbed, I cross-referenced. By Friday, I knew that binder better than Brad did, better than the person who wrote it did. I found every contradiction, every impossible requirement, every clause that, if followed literally, would grind the entire operation to a halt. Monday morning, I began my malicious compliance, and I was going to be thorough. One rule required that before scanning any package, the scanner must be calibrated using a test barcode, and the result logged in the scanner calibration log. Nobody had ever done this. There was no scanner calibration log. I created one. I calibrated my scanner before every single package, every single one. A process that used to take me 3 seconds now took 90. Another rule required that any pallet over 500 pounds be inspected by 2 employees with both signing off. Most pallets were over 500 pounds. I started flagging down coworkers for every single one. They thought I was joking at first. Another rule required that forklift operators conduct a pre-operation safety inspection consisting of 23 checkpoints before each use. Each use, meaning if I got off the forklift to grab a clipboard and got back on, that counted as a new use. I did the 23-point inspection roughly 40 times a day. Another said that any discrepancy, however minor, required that documentation amendment request I mentioned earlier. So every time a product code was slightly off, every time a weight was rounded, every time a pallet count had a typo, I filed the form. I filed dozens a day. Each one required Brad's signature. Brad had to personally sign every single one. Within a week, my productivity had dropped by 80%. But here's the beautiful part. I documented everything. Every rule I followed, every form I filed, every calibration I logged. I had a spreadsheet. It was glorious. And I was just the beginning, because here's what I didn't mention. When I went back to my desk that Monday, I sent one single email to the entire warehouse team, all 47 of us. The subject line was, "Important update from Brad, full rulebook compliance now mandatory." The body of the email was a summary of my meeting with Brad. Direct quotes: "Follow the rulebook to the letter every time, no exceptions." I noted that this applied to everyone, effective immediately per management direction. I also contacted Brad. Brad did not read his email. Brad never reads his emails. This was well known. Brad spent most of his day in meetings talking about synergy. 46 other warehouse employees read that email. 46 other warehouse employees who had been seething under this binder for 2 months, who had been waiting for permission to do exactly what I was about to do, saw that email and said, oh, it's on. By Wednesday, the entire warehouse was in full compliance. Full compliance. Shipments that used to take 4 hours took 16. The documentation amendment request forms piled up on Brad's desk in a stack so tall it literally fell over and knocked his world's best boss mug, which he bought for himself, onto the floor, where it shattered. I watched this happen through his office window. It was the greatest moment of my professional life up to that point, and it was about to be topped. By Friday, we had missed shipping windows for 6 major clients. The phones were ringing off the hook. Brad was sweating through his shirt. He called an emergency meeting and told everyone to use their judgment and speed things up. And that's when I stood up in a room full of 47 warehouse workers, and I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Brad, with respect, you told me personally on Wednesday of last week that we are to follow the rule book to the letter every time. No exceptions. Are you now instructing us to violate the rule book?" Brad turned a color I have never seen on a human face before. Sort of a purple red, he stammered. He said something about spirit of the rules. Someone in the back, I'm sure it was Dave from receiving, yelled, "Which is it, Brad?" And I swear to God, Brad just left. He walked out of the meeting, got in his car, drove away. The regional director showed up the next Monday. Her name was Patricia. Patricia was terrifying in the way that only 55-year-old women who have run warehouses for 30 years can be terrifying. Patricia pulled me into a conference room. She had my spreadsheet, she had the email, she had the stack of documentation amendment requests, she had everything. Patricia looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, "Walk me through this." So I did. I walked her through all of it, the rule book, the contradictions, the meeting with Brad, the email, the compliance. I didn't embellish, I didn't editorialize, I just laid out the facts because the facts did all the work for me. When I finished, Patricia closed her folder. She looked at me and said, "You know, most people, when they have a problem with their manager, they come to HR, they file a complaint, they get ignored. You," she tapped the folder, "you made it mathematically impossible to ignore." She offered me Brad's job on the spot. I took it. Of course I took it. I'm not a saint. Brad was transitioned out of his role, that's the official language, within 2 weeks. I heard through the grapevine that he got another consulting job somewhere. God help them. The binder. First thing I did as operations manager, I took it into the break room. I put it in the microwave. I set the microwave to 4 minutes. We all watched. It caught fire at around 2 minutes and 30 seconds. The fire alarm went off. The sprinklers came on. It was the best team building exercise we ever had. I replaced the binder with a single laminated card that said, "Use your judgment. If in doubt, ask. Don't be a Brad." I still have one of those cards in my wallet. 3 years later, best reminder I ever carried. And the moral of the story, my friends, is this. If you're going to hand a senior employee a 30-page rulebook and demand perfect compliance, you had better make sure that rulebook is perfect. Because if it isn't, and that employee is petty enough, patient enough, and just a little bit vindictive, they will read it, and they will use it, and they will end you.